Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Good morning. I'm inside the Beltway, where they're about to spend $1 trillion in infrastructure spending with a bipartisan vote in the Senate. And then Bernie Sanders introduced $3.5 trillion more. Now, the math in this adds up to Donald Trump spent $2 trillion, okay, 2.5 really, on COVID-related relief. That was necessary, PPP and other matters of absolute necessity given government-ordered shutdown. Once in a lifetime, and that's a real once-in-a-lifetime deal, because the COVID obliged the government to shut down parts of the economy. $2.5 trillion last year. President Biden shows up and he spends $1.5 trillion in new spending, COVID-related allegedly. That's $4 trillion. Now they're spending another $1 trillion on infrastructure. Now that's not once in a lifetime spending, although they like to call it that. That is stuff that should be happening on an ongoing basis, just like you do maintenance on your house. Fantastic Freddie was here yesterday to fix the air conditioning in Virginia at the house, and that's probably every 3 years Freon's got to be tapped off and stuff like that. That's just ongoing maintenance. Building a house is a one-time expense. So this $1 trillion is allegedly building houses and roads for the first time, but a lot of it isn't. But that's $5 trillion total spent between Trump and Biden over 18 months. And now Bernie Sanders wants to spend $3.5 trillion. And the New York Times reports this morning that with Republicans who have branded the plan, the Sanders plan, a reckless tax and spending spree, all likely opposed, Dems will need to remain virtually united in both chambers, a difficult prospect given the moderates have already begun to raise concerns about the price tag. You think we've all had almost at double-digit inflation last month. Jerry Boyer reported to me yesterday we hit 10% month-over-month inflation. I'm not quite sure he wasn't rounding up 0.5%, but by next month we'll be in 10%. Anyone who's doing anything right now, Fantastic Freddie told me the Freon had gone up $50, 100% up from the last 2 years ago, topping off. Everywhere and everyone knows this who's doing anything. Commodities have gone way up. And Democrats are going to take the cork out of the bottle, and we're going to be off to the races, and it's a nightmare. Meanwhile, the Delta variant is ripping through the country, but it's not killing people at the pace that the Alpha and Beta variants did. 124,000 new cases yesterday. A total of 558 deaths. We mourn every death, of course. That's not to make light of the 553 people who died yesterday, according to the New York Times. Far down. It's a spike. Guess what? It's not impacting children. It is not impacting children. Yes, there are a tiny number of new children cases across the United States, and that's a terrible thing, but it's like all the other terrible illnesses that affect children, and they break our heart. But there's no reason for parents to panic. And so in Dallas, children are, by order of the governor, supposed to be going to school maskless. And the Dallas superintendent ordered all students to wear masks in school buildings and on buses. There is no science for school masking. That's what I discussed with Dr. Fauci yesterday. He promised to go back and look at it. Everybody knows. Wall Street Journal story yesterday by the two doctors went everywhere in the world. Parents know. No need for kids to mask. And it screws them up. It hurts. It really hurts K through 3. Here's former CDC Director Robert Redfield. I think he wanted to be Robert Redford. Robert Redfield on Fox with Martha McCallum last night, cut number 2.
Yeah, I think it's really important you raise it. These policies should be grounded in data as opposed to opinion. I think your guest raises a very important part. There's been very few studies that really are compelling in that setting of the classroom. We did a number of studies when I was there just in fixed settings to recognize that if you aerosolized virus through a mask and then the recipient had a mask, and these were all dummies in rooms that were ventilated to a different degree, you could have an impact on the amount of virus that went from one to another. But that's not to say in a real life scenario that that's efficacious in the classroom. One of the things that I think is really important in the classroom, for example, is how to identify the silent epidemic. This is why we've recommended in a number of jurisdictions that are doing this to do routine testing of all the students twice a week so they can find out who's asymptomatically infected and who isn't and get them out of the transmission cycle. So I think
Done that. Oh, Martha's phone
data.
was on. That
So
was
we have
funny.
heard-
Martha's phone was on.
You know, but
No evidence, none. South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster added to that point yesterday, cut 11.
For the government to mask children to have who have no choice to protect adults who do have a choice is the wrong thing to do, and we're not going to do it. We're not going to shut our state
Teachers'
down.
unions are protecting their members from mandatory vaccine. We need mandatory vaccination of adults. It's effective, it works, it's safe. The Pentagon announced they're going to mandate the COVID-19 vaccine for U.S. service members. That's good. They serve the country. They did so voluntarily. Anyone who works for the government anywhere can be ordered to get a vaccine. They should be. Now, the Wall Street Journal reports that vaccination status has Americans picking sides. People are fighting about that. That might be the case, but people pick sides over sports. People pick sides over disputes over child custody. People pick fights over who's going to take care of mom and dad. People pick fights all the time. Doesn't mean that one side is right just because they're fighting. They're not. There is no good argument against the vaccination. None. People may choose not to get vaccinated. Teachers may choose not to get vaccinated. You should not impose that cost on anyone except yourself. And if you're not vaccinated and you're invited to the party, you ought to be saying, well, do you want me to come? I'm not vaccinated. If they say, sure, great. The Delta variant is sending more children to the hospital. Are they sicker too? According to the New York Times. Yes, there are a few more children in children's hospitals across the United States. They don't know the severity of the illness. Good news, of 600,000 Israelis who received the third dose, according to the Times of Israel, only 50 out of 600,000 reported side effects. Meanwhile, oil prices slid yesterday on worries that the Delta variant will crunch demand. And then we got the annual report from the IPCC, the UN Climate Alarm Council, and it's called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they said that nations have delayed curbing their fossil fuel emissions for so long that they can no longer stop global warming from intensifying over the next 30 years. Though there is a short window to prevent most harrowing future. What a surprise. They want government control. There is, however, no call. Don't take it seriously. They don't call for nuclear power. Never take anyone seriously who doesn't say we need a lot of nuclear power now. That's the only way you're going to get the kind of power this planet needs to be free and healthy and growing, with cars moving around. When they start building nukes again, then you can take people serious. Climate change has consumed journalistic standards, Gerard Baker writes in the Wall Street Journal this morning. He bets. He's right. Is this the end of summer as we've known it? The New York Times headline asked the other day, writes Baker, with characteristic hysteria. Parens, it's an old truth in journalism circles. When a newspaper headline asks a question, the answer is almost always no. Has this man found a cure for baldness? Are we all going to be vegans? Is this the start of a new era for the Jets? Ouch! Used to be the Browns were the punchline, now it's the Jets. The Journal also asks, student loan forbearance forever? Because the Biden administration is saying, not yet, you just keep not paying that. I've told you they planned $3.5 trillion. Did I tell you the Taliban made sweeping new gains overnight? Kabul is now in a crisis. There's a construction supercycle underway, according to the Financial Times. You know what a supercycle means? As governments across the world surge spending, it means the price of everything goes up, from Freon to cement. Boris Johnson is making a big gamble on this, which I'll tell you about after the break. Biden's big gamble as well is that people will politically like the short-term benefits and ignore the inflation risk. And in Great Britain, almost half of every student received an A or A starred as great inflation reaches a record high. In the COVID year, they normally get about 25% of English students get A levels, which allow them to go to the more colleges. 50+% got them last year. And the education secretary said, well, that's kind of what we needed to do because it was COVID, and everyone will feel bad if they didn't get an A level, meaning that the A levels mean nothing. I'll be right back, America. That's the rundown on the Hugh Hewitt Show. It's Hugh Hewitt. David M. Drucker is in the house of the Washington Examiner. I want to talk to him about his article yesterday on my pal Robert C. O'Brien. But first, David, you got small kids, or kids. I'm not sure they're small anymore.
Yes.
What do you think about
9 and 6.
masking K through 3? That's the argument I had with Dr. Fauci yesterday. I think it's nonsense, unsupported by science, with real costs. You're a parent. What do
So
you
look,
think?
you've asked me, yeah, and I followed parts of that interview. I haven't read the whole transcript yet. Look, I'm just going to give you my opinion because I've had to deal with this because I have a 6-year-old and I have a child going into the 4th grade. So I get out of, but I dealt with this last year, and that is that if I can get my kids on campus full time for normal schooling on campus and including a field program that our school happens to have, a lot of field trips, I'll live with the mask. I'm not making a scientific judgment here, but if it helps our school it makes people feel comfortable, if it helps for insurance reasons, if it helps for teachers, I'll do it, and I'm not going to complain about it. What I don't like and what I didn't like was my children being away from campus for an extended period.
Well, of course I agree with that.
Is damaging.
I agree with that, but that everyone's going back to school. The schools knows they will have a revolution if they don't go back to school. But I don't think you should be. I mean, if you have the opinion that masks are fine, that's okay. It's just that I've had 3 calls. People hate masks. They have kids with
Hugh,
speech.
I hate masks.
But I'm just stay focused on the kids. The cost of masking kids are enormous.
Right. The point I'm making here is not it's not a defense of the policy. It's just to say that there are things I care about more, and it seems
but that's what Fauci told me yesterday too, and then I pressed him on it because it's not the question. Everybody agrees with that. The question is, do we put masks on K through 3? And on that, they're all going back to school. David, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, they should all go back to school.
No, but on putting kids on masks on K through 3, because there's no science.
I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a. Yeah, I know, but I'm not saying there is science, and I'm not a big defender of the policy. If my school said they weren't required, I'd be thrilled. I just don't think it's damaging my children.
All right, so
it doesn't bother me.
That's okay. That's an opinion. Your children are not being damaged. You don't care. I think that is, by the way, the opinion of a lot of parents. But if people think their kids are suffering, they are going to be militant. And that's what's driving people. Now, let's go to O'Brien. You wrote the first piece about my buddy Robert O'Brien, last seen in California moderating the California recall debate with me and doing a fine job. I thought he'd be signed by NBC, CBS, or ABC this week, or Fox, because he did such a great job. But you think he's running for you picked up signs he may be running for president?
I think that he is interested in running for president. I don't think it's necessarily a slam dunk the way I think with some other people that I've covered and that I've written about extensively. I do think that Mr. O'Brien, Ambassador O'Brien, is hearing from at least some people, if not a number of people, that have encouraged him to run because they think he brings something important to the table from a foreign policy perspective and just from the perspective of having a pretty logical, conservative thought process. And he also has relationships in the Trump wing of the party as well as the traditional wing of the party. He came out of the traditional wing. He was probably the best national security advisor Trump had in that he was able to navigate all of that stuff, and he was able to navigate a very mercurial president. And so I think some people see him as an interesting candidate, and he is now doing what all of the rest of them are doing. In order to lay the groundwork for a possible bid, he's focusing on helping Republicans running in 22. And as I reported, he's hosting or headlining a fundraiser for J.D. Vance, the Ohio Senate candidate, and he's going to be traveling the country helping other congressional candidates for the Republicans. So add him to the list.
I do because I mentioned him in passing only because if they had a contested convention, there is a Mormon lane. And it involves Idaho, Wyoming, of course, Utah, Arizona, Guam, and American Samoa. Not real, and you got to look at California, too. There are places where LDS matters a whole bunch when people elect delegates.
That's true. And look, somebody like O'Brien, and I'm just riffing here, but imagine that you have a sort of young, dynamic candidate, but without a lot of foreign policy experience, would happen to rise to the fore. Or even, I guess, an elderly dynamic candidate who happens to rise to the fore, and they need a sort of button-down experience vice presidential running mate with a lot of foreign policy know-how. I mean, Mr. O'Brien could fit in that regard. And one of the best ways to put yourself in contention to be picked as vice president is to run for president. Not always the case. Mr. Pence didn't have to run for president to be selected by Mr. Trump, but it often helps.
I thought it was a great piece because it's the first time I've seen someone other than me mention O'Brien. I've seen stories of his being in South Carolina. He told me, I asked him about that because I was working on the debate with him last week. And he's very good on TV, too. He did Margaret Brennan, Chuck Todd all the time. I asked him about it last week. He said that was a vacation. That was a vacation. And I said, sure, Robert, like Tom Cotton firing machine guns in New Hampshire just because he happened to be in the northern part of the Granite State 2 weeks ago. Right? I think Cotton and Pompeo. Yeah, just so happened. Have you ever been firing machine guns in New Hampshire, David?
No. I mean, and I was recently in New Hampshire following the governor up a mountain. Definitely not a vacation. I don't think anybody in politics vacations in New Hampshire. All due respect to the New Hampshire tourism industry, it's a beautiful state, but that's not why we go.
And by the way, is Sununu running for Senate?
He's very intrigued. I don't think he's decided, but he is definitely intrigued and mulling it over.
Gosh, I hope so. That's a pickup for the Republicans. David Dreyer, follow him on Twitter at David M. Dreyer. I'll be right back, America. I'm the Hugh Hewitt. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. It's the 10th day of August, 2021. Virginia Beach School Board meets tonight to decide whether to put masks on children in schools. They should vote no. They had a bunch of parents turn out there last week, and Glenn Youngkin, who's running for governor, knows this, and everybody in the country knows this. But does Byron York know that this is a hot issue? Hello, Byron. Good morning.
Good morning, Hugh. How are you?
That transition was a little rough, but I've been talking about masking children in schools, which is really the stupidest thing that the CDC has done among many bad things this year. And I think it's actually driving people out of the Democratic Party and driving the recall of Gavin Newsom. What do you make of masks on kids in school?
Well, I was listening to your conversations, and you had some very good parents and others who called. And the one thing I thought was missing from this, I think during the worst of the pandemic, masks offered some measure of protection for adults, and it was debatable how much it was, but it offered some measure of protection. But they became something much more than that. Masks became much more than just a physical barrier that hopefully would stop some of the virus transmission. They became the most visible sort of virtue signaling. And certainly, as I, for example, traveling between Washington, D.C. and South Carolina, the mask culture, which is completely different, that in Washington, D.C., in all public areas, everybody was wearing masks. In South Carolina, they weren't. Going to New Orleans a few months ago, most of it was completely open. I went to one restaurant on the outskirts of New Orleans, just completely mask-free. Everybody was kind of having a party. Then you go to a coffee shop in a progressive part of the city. Everybody's wearing their masks. It became a visible statement. And that, I think, is still part of this debate, and with parents wanting to make that statement through their youngest children as well.
Now, what's interesting, that is no doubt true, which is why I continually bring the debate back to the very specific question of K through 3, because there are a bunch of concurrent debates about COVID. Do I get vaccinated? Do I get a booster shot? Can the government mandate the military? Can they mandate contract? There are like 1,000 COVID discussions, and I often say I don't know. I often say go get vaccinated. The overwhelming evidence is if you don't have an underlying medical condition that forbids it, go get vaccinated. But the overwhelming evidence of the downside of masks on K through 3 is with this one area where the CDC's gone off the rails, and Fauci admitted it to me yesterday. And I don't give Dr. Fauci a Rand Paul hard time, but I do press him on stuff. And he admitted, well, we got to look at that again. Maybe that's a short-term thing because I hear what you're saying, and he understands these doctors in the Wall Street Journal are big names in his world. Came out and said, this is crazy. And the UK came out and said, we're not masking kids. I think as a political issue, it's discrete and ought to be separated from the rest of the discussion because here there is no science. There is no argument at all, but the virtue signaling is having real-world consequences, Byron. That's why I carve it off.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially on the political left, view children as kind of the next frontier in the COVID battle because, the vaccines are not approved for use for children 12 and under. A lot of them are pushing for that, even though it's just not risk. There's not enough risk there to warrant doing this. So masks are the same way. And focusing on K3, the youngest, the very youngest, I think is a smart thing to do. But it's clearly, going back to the virtue signaling, it's one of the new areas in this battle, because I would say, with the exception of people with autoimmune disorders, some very specific conditions, I think that there's a consensus about vaccinations, and of course what happens is when people get involved in a cause and they prevail, they want to take it farther.
This is very wise.
Farther as children.
This is a very wise summation. There's a culture war in the United States. A front in that culture war is COVID, and a battle on that front is whether children's ought to mask, and the most intense battle on that front is whether K through 3 ought to mask at school. And that's how you ought to think about COVID. And we've identified a front where the anti-masking people, I tried to explain this to Fauci, you're sacrificing credibilities. You're pouring troops and resources and credibility into a battle you cannot win because of, I point to Jeff in Ohio, the lawyer who's married to a lawyer with 2 little boys, one who's probably just a touch on the spectrum, very smart and needs the mask, and one who's got a speech disorder and he hates masks. It's just not something where, but the culture wars consume everything. It's just too damn bad. Let me ask you about consuming everything. Let's talk about the Sanders budget. Another $3.5 trillion, Byron. Are they going to get 51 votes for this? Because inflation is going to go from near double digits to roaring if they pass this thing.
I think after an amendment process, they're determined to do it, and it just seems crazy. But after an amendment process, I think they view this as their chance. Now, it's bizarre when they have just 220 votes in the House. They can only lose literally a handful of votes. And the Senate is tied 50-50. I'm just a broken record talking about the Democrats do not actually control a majority of seats in the Senate. The vice president constitutionally is forbidden from voting unless there's a tie. So they got to get their 50. They got to get their 50 going. They view it, I think, this is emotionally, this is a leftover from the Trump years where they felt so aggrieved and so angry that they wanted to just pass this, enact their entire agenda, this entire agenda that they felt was frustrated, they felt would have happened under Hillary Clinton, but was frustrated under Donald Trump. So they want to just do this. And the fact that they don't even control a majority of seats in the Senate is not, they feel, a reason to not do it.
But Byron, they will get wiped out if they do things like amnesty and reconciliation, if they do things like eliminate stepped-up basis, which will crush millions of Americans at the time of the death of the second spouse. Family businesses will be sold, farms. It's just crazy what they're proposing to do politically.
On the amnesty thing, I think, which is use reconciliation to pass a measure that would legalize some large portion, if not all, of the people who are in the United States illegally. The number usually is 12 million, but who knows what it really is. But I think on amnesty, that is real signaling. That's a messaging portion of the bill, because I believe they think that the Senate parliamentarian will tell them that they cannot use reconciliation to do it, but then they can go to their groups, their activist groups, and say, well, we tried. We gave it our best. Because the President of the United States himself has said he wants to throw amnesty in this enormous spending bill and pass it through reconciliation, which leads me to an idea. Do you think Republicans should press for tightening the filibuster, for filibuster reform on the side of tightening the filibuster under making it clear that you cannot use reconciliation to do any BS thing you want to do?
Yes, because, by the way, I'm not so sure the parliamentarian will say no. It was reconciliation that repealed the tax on Obamacare. Tom Cotton killed the Obamacare tax via reconciliation. If they add a tax, if they just make revenue from amnesty, if they say $50 and we'll forgive your sins of breaking the law on entry, that makes it a revenue bill. I think they'll get it in. But I think the bigger, they might, the House, I mean, they're going to get wiped out. They're going to lose 30 seats in the House minimum. And a lot of congressmen are going to lose their jobs if they vote for this. But if they do away with stepped-up bases, Byron, and John Thune started to write about this as farmers and small foresters, it's everybody who owns a house in any city. It's a devastating deal. And if they do that, that's clearly under the reconciliation rules. That's a political, throwing themselves on a political hand grenade for the benefit of like almost no money. What's wrong with these political people in the Democratic Party?
Well, that's why I think you have to view this in terms of emotion as opposed to reason. First of all, I mean, politicians have done suicidal things in the past. I mean, they were in 2010 they were told that if they pushed Obamacare through, they would lose a ton of seats, and they lost, 63 seats in the House in 2010? Yep. So they sacrificed their jobs for it. They can do it again.
63 seats. My gosh. I'll be right back, America. After redistricting, that's a permanent majority for a decade. Stay. Welcome back, America. That music means after a couple of weeks away, 3 in fact, Admiral James Stavridis, retired United States Navy, former head of Southern Command, former Allied Chief Supreme Commander of everything, the NATO head. Also now chairman of the Rockefeller Foundation. Admiral Stav, how are you?
Doing well. I hope you are back. You look tanned, rested, and refreshed.
Well, I spent 2 weeks with grandkids under the age of 9, one of whom is 2, and so I tell people I had to come back to work to get some rest.
No, I have 4 under the age of 5. So,
oh, gosh!
I get it.
What, do you and Mrs. Admiral Stav ever take them on your own like we did?
We do, but, in limited doses, 48-hour limit. It's like Ben Franklin said about fish and visitors after 2 days.
We had a 72-hour pass because they'd been in COVID lockdown in England for a year, and those 72 hours were blissful for them. But my gosh, the fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I really did have to come back to work to get some rest. Admiral, I want to ask you about, are you a Jaguars fan? You're down in Florida most of the time. Are you a Jacksonville Jaguars fan?
I live in and around the beaches of Jacksonville, and I follow the Jaguars. But like everybody else, you become a total fan of the team you followed when you were 13 years old. So when I was 13, I was going to Quantico High School outside of Washington, D.C. So I'm a fan of the Washington Football Club, which I like to think of as my proposed name is the Fighting Admirals.
By the way, I love that name, and I knew that. But now the Jaguars have become my second team. I'm wearing my Browns gear because the Browns are the only team actually in the NFL. But if you're going to have a second team, my team is the Jaguars because of Urban Meyer. And I got to get you to meet Coach Meyer, who listens to the program often. He's already at work by now. It's 7:30 on the East Coast, and so he might already be at work. But the reason is you'd love Coach Meyer. He's very smart guy. But he had a quote yesterday, and I'd like to ask you the applicability of this quote to the U.S. Navy. He was asked by the NFL Network, do you have a 4-year plan for winning? Because you got Trevor Lawrence, a new quarterback, and the worst team in the league. He has lots of draft choices. And Urban Meyer replied, we don't have a 4-year plan. We have a 1-year plan. What is the relevance of that kind of thinking to the U.S. Navy, Admiral?
I think when you're in desperate straits, as the Jaguars are, because, as you say, statistically, they're the worst team in the league. They finished at the bottom. That's why they're getting all these draft picks. And when you're at the absolute ground zero, you have only one thing you can do, and that is to fight. And I'll quote a very ancient strategist. That's Sun Tzu, the great Asian strategist. And he's well known for cleverness and finding your way around the corner and tricking your opponents and thinking about the long game. But Sun Tzu also said, Hugh, when on death ground, fight. And I think that's where Coach Meyer is coming from. The team is not exactly on death ground. We have a great owner, Shad Khan, who supports the team. The city really supports the team. Getting the coach is huge. Getting the draft picks is huge. Not death ground, but pretty close. We got to perform immediately, and I suspect that Coach Meyer is channeling that ancient Sun Tzu, when on death ground, fight. Once you get through death ground, then you have the luxury of the long-term thinking. I'd say for the U.S. Navy, it's a bit of both. We got to be prepared to fight tonight on the South China Sea, as the saying goes. But we also have to play the long game in our acquisitions, our strategic thinking, where we send our ships, how we structure it, the kind of training we do. There's both a short and a long game that has to occur at the same time.
Is the United States Navy ready to successfully fight in the South China Sea tonight, Admiral?
I think it would be a close fight, but if you ask me as an admiral, would I rather take the turn or hold the cards of the U.S. Navy versus the People's Liberation Army Navy? I'm going to hold on to the U.S. Navy card, because it's not just the Navy, because we, the United States, would bring massive long-range air from bases all around the region. We have domination in space. We have still an edge in cyber, in addition to having highly capable ships, deeply experienced. Having said all that, it would be a tough fight. We would lose ships. We would lose sailors. In fact, in the book over my right shoulder here, as you know, 2034, I'd be more worried about which hand of cards to grab. Because the Chinese are closing that gap. They're moving quickly. So short answer, yes, I believe the U.S. Navy can still prevail if we had to fight tonight, but it's getting closer and closer.
Admiral, 2034 has continued to sell and sell and sell for the same reason Tom Clancy's book sold and sold and sold. It's a strategist's approach to fiction, and I think it's very educational for people, and congratulations on a bestseller. By the way, how goes the sequel? Are you done yet? I mean, you've had a couple of weeks.
We're about halfway done, and it's set in 2054, and instead of China as the centerpiece, in 2054, it's artificial intelligence, as you would expect, by mid-century.
I'm looking forward to that. Now, back to the Navy. They love 30-year plans, but they fought a war game during my vacation. I don't know what you were doing the last 2 weeks. I read about it. They lost, the United States lost the war game in 3 moves. And they put the results out there so people would understand we lost the war game. You're not shocked by that, but do you think the public understands that while you say we will prevail, the losses would be high and the possibility of losing is real?
I'm not shocked, having participated in too many war games to even begin to count over the years. You win many of them, you lose quite a few of them. If you don't lose some of them, you're not doing it right. You know, this is not like an election in North Korea. This is something you want to be competitive. You want to see how it's really going to play out. And so, no, I'm not shocked. And as I just said, the Chinese are close in a lot of technologies. And plus, Hugh, you have to remember the South China Sea is home court advantage for them. They can concentrate all their forces there right from the beginning. If they come in with the element of surprise, I wouldn't be surprised to see the U.S. take a bloody nose or two. But over time, it's like World War II, over time that industrial size capability kicks in. I think we would still prevail. But no, I was not surprised, and I think plaudits to the U.S. Navy for conducting a war game. And for putting it out there, because that needs to be part of the conversation too. This is not a slam dunk.
Now, I got a flyboy in the family who tells me I make a civilian mistake all the time. I'm reminded of General Mattis's chief of staff, Colonel Athene, once told me civilians never think of second and third order consequences of war. He was right, and so I listened to my flyboy. I always overestimate the Chinese capability because they are a first-generation carrier Navy, and we are a fifth or sixth-generation carrier Navy, and you learn stuff and that stuff matters. I just hope it matters enough, Admiral, and that the hypersonics don't offset that advantage. That's my civilian worry, is that those wonderful, magnificent machines that you have commanded as the flotilla commander, et cetera, that they don't all sink in the first wave of hypersonic missiles.
It is certainly a risky part of this scenario and was certainly, I am certain, part of the war game. On the other hand, once the first volleys go, there is a moment when the U.S. can respond. And again, we're not just relying on those beautiful 100,000 tons, 7 acres of U.S. sovereign soil at sea. They can move 1,000 miles a day. They've got a lot of protection around them. They're a tough ship to kill, even for a hypersonic. But they're not out there alone and unafraid. Again, long-range air coming in from a plethora of bases around the region. Behind that island chain, you're going to see our Marines, our Special Forces, our SEALs, our Green Berets, our Recon Marines moving around those artificial islands, going after those bases. We are going to find ways to shoot down some of the hypersonics. Others we will destroy before they are even launched. It's a complicated game of war game, but boy, it's not a game in real life. And yes, there will be losses and probably a carrier or two, but we have 10 highly capable nuclear-powered 100,000-ton carriers and another dozen or so large-deck amphibs. That's a lot of firepower coming off the sea. That's before the Air Force kicks in, before our long-range cruise missiles kick in. We got a lot of capability to put at play as well.
I hope that the scenario I've been reading about, where they also take out whatever carriers around, but at Sugi, Okinawa, and Guam, does not come to pass. I want to play for you, Admiral, an exchange between former National Security Advisor O'Brien and candidate for California Governor Doug Osee that occurred at the debate I moderated last week. Let's roll that tape, Dwayne.
Thank you, Christine. According to FBI Director Christopher Wray, the Chinese Communist Party has taken trillions of dollars in U.S. intellectual property and is currently influencing American policy through donations to universities through front organizations like the Confucius Institutes. Governor DeSantis in Florida just signed legislation to stop this conduct in Florida. Congressman Osee, what do we do to protect the UC system and the Cal State system, the gems of our educational program in California? It's what's made our state so great, so competitive. It's why so many innovators live here and come here to study. How do we protect those universities from IP theft and malign activity?
This is actually one of the most interesting questions that our country faces right now. It's not the UC thing I'll get to. CCP, as you know, is engaged in a systematic effort to steal our IP. It's been going on for at least 30 years. They started in agriculture. They've taken our tree technology, our livestock technology, our crop technology, and they've taken it to China, and they've tried to implement it. Right? Henry Kissinger wrote a book in 2011 called On China. It's about this thick, small print, but enlightening. I commend it to you to read if you want to know what the Chinese are up to. In terms of the UC and CSU system, in terms of protecting the ability to continue with the IP, we need to have a very, very strong standard for who ends up owning the IP that comes out. I'm not sure that's a state or a federal issue. I would prefer it be a federal thing for all universities across the country, but we can do it here if we have to, and I would support it. We are at war with China. We're not shooting bullets yet, but we are at war with China. You need to
What do you make of that, Admiral Stav?
Well, it brings us back to the conversation we had a moment ago, which is cyber and cyber security. That's another enormous part of any conflict, God forbid, between the United States and China. And I think Robert O'Brien, for whom I have a lot of regard, is correct to say we're already in a shadow war in this cyber zone. And in terms of militaries, we still, again, have an edge, not as significant as I would like, but that'll be a significant part of the conflict when and if it comes with China. By the way, before we leave entirely the military zone, I'll say the thing we haven't touched on that's utterly important, crucial perhaps, is submarines. Here, the United States has a profound advantage in our nuclear attack submarines, both acoustically, weapons delivery, experience unmatched. They would be a very significant force. You know, we used to talk about infantry, the queen of the battlefield, queen in the chess term, that can go anywhere, do anything. The queen of the battlefield in the maritime world is going to be the submarine going forward. So
Admiral,
yes, O'Brien's roughly right. We're in a conflict. By the way, on the Confucius Institutes, I'll add to say this is something that we have got to carefully vet any contact between United States and Chinese efforts, because our intellectual property is at risk.
Navy retired. Thank you, Admiral. Talk to you next week. Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, back inside the Beltway after 2 weeks off. Again, my thanks to Kurt Schlichter, Mark Davis, and Ed Morrissey for guest hosting last week. They all did a great job. This is the week to be in town, though, because the Senate is about to pass a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, which I would probably vote for if I were a Republican senator, and a $3.5 trillion budget. In addition, is being proposed by Bernie Sanders, which no one should support. It's a nightmare. Here to talk about the budget is Senator Steve Daines of the great state of Montana. Senator, welcome back. How are you?
Hey, Hugh, I think you mean Senator Tom Cotton, but I'm sorry you couldn't get Steve on board. He'd be a much better guest.
No, you know Dwayne, and I'm holding it up for the audience. You're looking at my rundown. And on my rundown, it says Montana Senator Steve Daines at 8:06, and it says at 8:33, Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton. So you can see that, of course, Dwayne has once again led me over a cliff.
Well, there are a few states that can rival Arkansas in its natural beauty, but Montana comes in a close second behind it. And I love Montana. I love Steve Daines, so I'm sure he's going to be a great guest for you later.
Yeah, but I got to tell you, you know Dwayne, and is there anyone on your staff for 20 years who just repeatedly sets you up for failure like that?
Hugh, we all know that Dwayne is the secret to your success, and that's why the show keeps on trucking along.
You shameless politician!
Even in your extended lackadaisical summer absence for these last 8 weeks?
2 weeks.
Extended.
Senator absence. Cotton. Let me ask you about the Bernie budget, because I think this is such a nightmare. We got to sound the alarm. First of all, it's got an amnesty in it, doesn't it?
Yeah, Hugh, the Democrats are trying to sneak through a massive amnesty using arcane budget rules, of all things. They say that it's going to be very small and targeted, Hugh, but that's far from the case. You know, President Obama instituted a program called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, also known as DACA. There's about 700,000 illegal aliens who have registered for that. Many people say that we could give legal status to those persons who have registered for that program, or even those who are eligible for the terms of that program, which should be a little over 1 million. President Trump had a proposal for that. In addition to building the wall and ending chain migration, the Democrats blocked it. But the way the Democrats frame that policy, it would extend to anywhere from 3 to 5 million people. Plus, they want to extend that amnesty to anyone who is a so-called essential worker. Well, guess what? The way they define essential worker basically would encompass almost all illegal aliens in this country. And Hugh, here's the kicker. The reason why they argue they can include it in a budget measure and pass the rules of the Senate, which require all provisions to have a primary budgetary impact, not a non-budgetary policy impact, is because once you legalize all these illegal aliens, they will be eligible for the whole range of federal welfare programs. Welfare, food stamps, housing assistance, eating assistance, Obamacare. Just think about that. They're going to try to pass a massive amnesty, and their argument in favor of doing it is so they can give all those illegal aliens more welfare.
Now, the necessary precondition for putting something in the budget reconciliation is that the Senate parliamentarian approve it as related to the budget. I know that you get credit for repealing the dreaded Obamacare tax because you put it into a budget reconciliation. If they put a penalty on all of the 3, 4, 10 million, however many they legalize via this amnesty, such as, $100 and we'll forgive your sin, in you come and you're eligible for benefit. Will that qualify their proposal under the reconciliation rules?
Hugh, it should not, because again, the rules say that that kind of budgetary impact can't be merely incidental. That's the exact quote, merely incidental. And sadly, given the fact that they're proposing $3.5 trillion of spending, imposing a small administrative fee of $100 would be a merely incidental drop in the bucket, or even less than that. And it's clear that the Democrats' objective here is not to raise money. Their objective is to give amnesty. The Obamacare tax was very different. It was framed as a tax in the law. The Supreme Court upheld the law specifically on the grounds that the individual mandate was a tax. And my proposal to zero out that tax had a huge impact on the federal budget. I think the Congressional Budget Office estimated it would save about $350 billion. It's what made possible the tax bill's extension of tax cuts for working class families even longer out into the future. But to impose a small administrative fee on illegal aliens as you grant them legal status is plainly incidental to the real intent, which is to give them legal status.
Okay, I wanted to distinguish between those cases because I've heard that argument made. Now I want to turn to their attack on the double death tax. They want to do away with stepped-up basis, which will screw, and I mean really screw, every family business in America and every homeowner in any urban area or suburban area that appreciates where a house is appreciated. Do you think the American people know what the double death tax and the attack on stepped-up basis means, and will that carry the day and persuade Democrats it's political suicide to pass it?
Hugh, I don't think many Americans follow the ins and outs of arcane tax policy until they get hit with that huge tax bill. And the stepped-up basis, as you say, could hit millions of Americans. We're not talking about the super wealthy or billionaires or tycoons. We're talking about, as you say, people who have invested in a home, who have maintained it, perhaps renovated it, added a deck. They've seen home prices rise over the course of their lifetime, and grandma and grandpa pass away, and all of a sudden they're hit with a tax at death, even though they thought they were free of the estate tax. Because what stepped-up basis does is take the value at the time of one's death and resets it for the heirs or the assigns. So if grandma and grandpa bought that home in the 70s for $140,000, it's now worth, because of appreciation, let's say $1.5 million. The kids who inherit it will inherit it at that basis for tax purposes, $1.5 million. But if you don't reset it and you say the death of your grandma and grandpa causes the capital gains tax to kick in, and they're raising the capital gains tax, by the way, in this budget, if they pass it to 28%, all of a sudden that family is going to owe hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes. And the only way they can pay those taxes, Hugh, is to sell the family home. And that's even more true, too, for family farmers and ranchers and foresters and small businesses. Again, we're not talking about the ultra-wealthy here. We're talking about hardworking middle-class families who have lived in a home for their lifetime, or who have ran a business or a farm for a lifetime and will have to sell it to pay off the taxes.
And I have a bunch of stations in New Hampshire. I want them to understand that Maggie Hassan is going to tax every lake house that has gone up in value. I want everyone in Nevada to understand that the Senator Cortez is going to tax I can't remember her last name, Cortez. Help me out here, Senator.
Kathy Cortez Masto. Who after next year will be the former senator from Nevada.
I hope so. I think Adam Laxalt's going to win. She is going to vote for this. Raphael Warnock in Georgia. Everyone who lives in Atlanta is listening to me right now. It's going to get you if you have a house in the suburbs. And everyone in every swing state has got to understand. Democrats are going to vote to tax every big city and suburb where home appreciation is gone, and your estates are going to get destroyed. And Tom Cotton has been talking about small forestry people in Arkansas, and Steve Daines is going to talk about farmers in Montana. But it's so much bigger than that, Senator Cotton. It's truly revolutionary.
Yeah, that's what I say. I don't think many homeowners imagine themselves to be in the Democratic Party's definition of ultra wealthy. But again, if they live in an area where home prices have risen and they've held that home for a lifetime, Uncle Sam, under the Democrats' plans, will show up and say, you got to cough over hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the only answer will be to sell the family home. And again, that goes doubly so for family businesses and farms. So I don't think many Americans appreciate that they are in the crosshairs of the Democratic Party's tax machine.
Mark Kelly in Arizona, Senator Kelly, I don't know if he does this, Phoenix, Prescott, Scottsdale, Tucson, they're all going to get hammered. The homeowners there where grandma and grandpa moves, Florida, same deal. So tell me, will any Democrats defect on stepped-up basis?
Well, I certainly hope so, Hugh. I mean, I hope they defect in the entire budget because it is a completely reckless taxing and spending plan that is unnecessary and that will simply drive more inflation, cost more Americans their savings, probably cost a lot of Americans their jobs, too. On something like this, I think what will happen, it won't take their bill down entirely, but in their tortured backroom negotiations, maybe one or two brave Democrats will step forward and say, we're not going to do that. Or maybe I should say fearful Democrats step forward and say, I'm not going to do that because I will lose my election next year.
Last question. How long can Vote-A-Rama go on? Because I think that the Republican Party ought to keep them on the floor for weeks and weeks, if you can, voting on every line of this nightmare.
Hugh, it can go on until exhaustion sets in or until there's no more creative amendments left. I think we're going to start voting here in about 3 hours. So I would expect it to go at least into the wee hours of Wednesday morning, if not beyond.
Can't you organize the caucus to just do amendment after amendment for weeks? It's sort of the only chance you have for a real talking filibuster.
Well, they're going to, trust me, they're going to take a lot of very hard votes over the next few hours, and those votes are going to come back to haunt them.
Weeks and weeks, Senator Cotton, weeks and weeks. Tom Cotton, it's always a pleasure. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Ted Lasso is back. I've been watching. It's so good. The first episode was not so good, but season 2 has picked up very good. I'm joined by Steve Daines, senator from Montana. I don't know if he's a Ted Lasso fan. Senator Daines, you watch Ted Lasso?
I don't.
You are the only guy who doesn't watch Ted Lasso. You got to watch Ted Lasso on Apple TV, Senator.
I'll tell you, I get asked if I watch Yellowstone. And I tell folks that all my rancher friends don't have helicopters, just to set the record straight.
Well, I'm not recommending Yellowstone. I'm recommending that, like most Americans, you probably don't know a lot about European soccer.
I don't.
Yep, neither do I, but you'll love this show. You'll love it. All right, Senator, let's get to Vote-A-Rama. The Bernie budget, which I talked about with Senator Cotton earlier, is a nightmare, especially because of the amnesty that's in it and the attack on stepped-up bases. What would the elimination or qualification of stepped-up bases do to people in Montana?
Well, this is an existential threat to our Montana way of life. The stepped-up basis allows the generational handoff of farm and ranch operations, just for starters, or any kind of family business. And when you take away the step-up basis, which is just a reset at the time of death to the current market values, you literally are undermining the ability for, as we're so proud of, Hugh, in Montana, to say this is a fourth generation, a fifth generation farm and ranch operation. That's what's at stake here. And it's not just the step-up basis, of course. It's what they plan to do with the death tax of significantly reducing the exclusions. And here's the other problem we have in Montana and around the country, is you're seeing significant escalations in land values. Unlike we haven't seen numbers moving up like this probably in decades, as we're seeing this migration now of people fleeing the cities. They don't feel safe. They're overtaxed. They don't sense they have their freedoms anymore, and they're moving to states like Montana. And because of that, it's driving prices up, and it's having a direct effect on locals there because they are asset rich and they're cash poor. So this is a big deal for a state like Montana or any state that has an ag economy.
Well, I point out it's a big deal for Senator Hassan in New Hampshire, where a lot of people own homes, second homes, vacation homes, lake homes that have appreciated over the years. Those will have to be sold when mom and dad dies or grandpa dies. It's a big deal in Georgia, where Atlanta and Augusta have experienced extraordinary home appreciation, and Senator Warnock is wishing on them, all those people, enormous tax bills. It's a huge deal for Senator Kelly in Arizona. When I think of Scottsdale and Tucson and Prescott, where appreciation has captured everyone, it's a huge deal for Cortez Masto in Nevada, where Las Vegas prices. All these red state Democrats are going to vote to tax all these people, and they're going to say, oh, no, we have an exclusion. We have an exemption of $1 million. And don't worry, if it's less than $1 million, you won't be impacted. Senator Daines, they are trying to hide what they're doing, which means we ought to throw a spotlight on it.
Hugh, this is a very important moment in our nation's history to expose what they are trying to do. Listen, this is not this moderate party of Joe Biden that's in charge here in Washington, D.C. This is truly the radical, and this is not hyperbole, this is not exaggeration, this is the truth. This really is now the party of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. You saw Ed Markey just yesterday, the senator from Massachusetts, talking about this bill that we're going to be voting on here, starting the votes on today. It's the Green New Deal. And so this is really a parade of horribles. It's a celebration of the far left. And as you know, Bernie Sanders is not officially a Democrat. He's a socialist Democrat that happens to caucus with the Democrats. But Hugh, that's the center of gravity now for the Democrat Party. I come from the state of Mike Mansfield. Mike Mansfield, of course, was the longest-serving majority leader in the United States Senate in the history of the institution. He was a Marine, but this is no longer the party of Mike Mansfield. This is the party of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
It's not the party of Jack Kennedy. It's not the party of Bobby Kennedy. It's not the party of Scoop Jackson. It's not the party of any Florida senator you can name. Bill Nelson, now heading NASA, or used to head NASA. It's not, any of these people have nothing to do with this radical left wing. But stepped up basis scares some Republicans. They think it sounds like they're defending the rich. They're not. They're defending homeowners in Boulder. They're defending the Denver suburbs. Isn't one of the Colorado senators up this year, this cycle?
Yeah, it is.
Bennett?
Yeah, Bennett's up. Michael Bennett's up at this.
Michael Bennett will lose if he votes to eliminate or curb stepped-up basis.
You know, Hugh, though, I've been trying to look at the politics behind this. Like saying, how in the world are they going to get away with this? First of all, I don't think they will. But I think they're on a kamikaze mission. I think many of them just believe, they believe in these ideals of this far-left agenda as much as we believe in our ideals of liberty and freedom and limited government. And so I think they view this as a righteous mission they're on, even if it means it may cost them politically. And as you know, Hugh, if they are successful in moving forward this agenda, it's oftentimes very difficult to put that genie back in the bottle. We saw that with the Affordable Care Act. They just decided to go for it, and it cost them dearly politically in the 2010 election. But as you can see, the Republicans were not successful in a repeal and replace. It's the law of the land. It's probably going to stay here for the foreseeable future. Similarly, these changes they're making, these radical changes, will be difficult to reverse because of the nature of the inertia of this institution and because the margins are so slim. I'm shocked that they can get 50 Democrats. They need all of them. It's a 50-50 Senate right now. They need everyone. If just one Democrat decides this is not going to be the law of the land, they stop this entire freight train. Of course, we know the normal suspects are Sinema and Manchin, and there's a handful of others. So this is something, Hugh, we've got to continue, as you said, shine a light on it, expose what's going on. This is a threat to the future of this country.
The attack on stepped-up basis is also an attack on the American dream. And the left doesn't believe in the American dream, which is own a home, stay in it for 30 years, pass money on to your family, build a business, keep it going for 30 years, have the kids run over the business, take over the business, because it will be taxed at the time of death, and everybody will lose. But the Democrats, when they are asked about it, lie, or they simply don't believe in accumulating wealth over generations.
This is the party now, the Democrats, the party of envy and of confiscation of success, of wealth. And it's interesting when you look at polling data for the death tax, which I think is the most immoral tax on the books. And as they're looking to take these exclusions down to numbers, you'd say this $11 million, they're talking to take it down to $1 or $2 million. When you poll that nationally, it's interesting how this is a policy that is unpopular by over 60 to 70% of the American people. Why? Because just what you said, Hugh, it's a fundamental attack on the American dream. And I think that's the way the American people see it. That's why we've got to I don't want to have to let the Democrats pass this and then say, okay, you're going to pay for it in 22. I mean, That's probably going to happen anyway. We've got to stop it, Hugh. It's more important to stop it right now, because I'm just afraid, again, it'll be hard to reverse many of these socialist policies they want to put in place.
Oh, the stepped-up basis is a game changer for America. People don't understand it. Let me ask you, Senator, when Catholics do Eucharistic adoration or Protestant churches do prayer vigils, they go around the clock and they pass around a sign-in sheet so that the church is never empty. And you can keep it going for as many days as you have volunteers for hours. Are the Republicans organized to keep the Votorama going? This $3.5 trillion bill, and every line of it ought to be voted on, and amendments ought to be offered. How long are Republicans going to do, like, you sign up for 3 a.m. today, and Tom Cotton will take 3 to 5 a.m. every day, or 2 to 5 a.m. He's a Ranger, right? You can make him do that. And I just think you want this to go every day for as long as possible.
Yeah, well, remember, Hugh, this is step one in this process. This basically puts the rocket on the launch pad and ignites it. And we're gonna offer. I'm hearing at least 40 amendments. So you're going to see us voting on 40. Every one of those will be a very, very difficult amendment for the Democrats to vote for. So this will be a very political kind of exercise to make this as painful as possible, as we call this Votorama. It's going to kick off here this afternoon. But
now, Senator, let me interrupt you for a second.
Yeah,
this is Hugh Hewitt talking from the media perspective. I don't understand the Senate rules, but I understand media. If you go through those 40 amendments, and that takes 3 days, and then you keep them there as long as possible, media will see, they will understand, they will pick up. If you guys go the old talking filibuster, Jimmy Stewart, Mr. Smith goes to Washington, and you keep them there for week after week or day after day, and honest to God, I hope you go week after week, it will be the story of the year. But you 50 have to commit.
Well, remember, Hugh, though, this is going to have a number of additional battles on the Senate floor going all the way, I think, into October.
I know that, but this isn't technically, theoretically. Could the Republicans stay there week after week doing Votorama?
I think we'd have to hold a quorum. It's probably beyond my pay grade here in parliamentary procedure. I know we're going to go into probably the wee hours of the morning just tonight with straight votes. But they're going to have the Democrats have to go back home to their constituents.
Yeah, but don't let them go. I mean, I'm making an appeal here. I don't know the rules. You might have to hold a quorum. But if you don't have to hold a quorum, if it only takes one senator at a time, some of you guys want to go on vacation. Tell them not this year. This year, if it's the American dream, we got to fight. They didn't take days off in World War II, right? The guys in Iraq and Afghanistan, they didn't take days off. If you can keep them on the floor, keep them there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But I'll just tell you, Hugh, it's going to go well into October, and we've got to keep the crescendo building here so that
you can't let them on the. I'm advocating for my own tactics here. Don't let them on the beaches. You've got to repel them at the beaches today. You've got to keep them there. Drive them back.
You're going to see. I encourage your listeners to watch what happens on the floor of the Senate today. It's going to be a great fight. Every one of these votes will likely be. We're down a couple senators on our side because of some serious family illness issues. But it's going to be literally 50-50 votes all the way out through the day. It'll be quite the scene to be watching.
I will be, but Senator, please take back to if you have a luncheon today.
I will.
You heard the message. Good. You got it.
All right,
Steve Daines, always a pleasure. Thank you.